How's it going, everyone? So I'm just drinking some delicious gynostemma slash jiagalon slash miracle grass tea from Hyperion Herbs. And I've been reading the book Adaptogens by, I think the guy's name is David Winston. And I've kind of put this book on hold for a long time because I recognize that a lot of these herbs that we call adaptogens, and the whole concept of adaptogens is not entirely accurate. There's like a lot of kind of assumptions that we make about these plants based on people's experiences and whatever scientific evidence we can kind of scrub up, along with traditional textbooks on Chinese text and Ayurvedic text on these herbs and substances. And I wanted to, and basically I recognize that a lot of these herbs that we use as that we call adaptogens, they're not entirely adaptogens. They don't work the way we think they do. So I kind of put off that book for a while, but I've been reading it lately. I've already made a video. I forgot what the video was about, what it said exactly, but it was something like adaptogens are a lie or adaptogens are a myth or something like that. But basically, here's the thing. So first of all, we have this idea that there are herbs like Ashwaganda, Rhodiola, Panax Red Ginseng, and a variety of others that we call them adaptogens. Okay, and the idea is that they modulate the stress response in a way that increases our body's resilience and adaptability to stress, while helping us recover from it and become stronger as a result over time. And the real kicker here is this idea that these adaptogenic herbs, so they call them, that they're multi-directional, where if you tend to be extremely anxious, you can take any of these adaptogenic herbs and they will calm you down. And if you're already too calm, these adaptogenic herbs supposedly will energize you. Okay, and the fact of the matter is a lot of these herbs don't always work that same way all of the time. So one great example that I was talking to my friend about recently, and it surprises me that he's not aware of this, but whatever. Basically, we're talking about ashwagandha. Ashwagandha is like the biggest one right now, and I've been talking about ashwagandha's negative effects since like 2015. I've made probably 30 videos on ashwagandha or more by now, because I've tried all the different extracts. I've tried the Shoden, KSM 66. I tried the sensorol extract. I've tried the regular, just basic standardized ashwagandha extract. It's not patented. I've tried the whole root, whole herb. I tried them all, different dosages, different protocols, different brewing methods, etc., different extraction ratios and types. The fact is, ashwagandha has completely different effects for different people. Some people have extremely bad negative side effects when they take ashwagandha. For other people, ashwagandha is like a miracle herb. But from what I've seen, the majority of reports that I've personally seen on ashwagandha tend to be that it has extremely beneficial properties for lowering anxiety, putting people to sleep, and chilling them out. In fact, that was a notable quote from my first ashwagandha video, where I said ashwagandha will calm you the fuck down. People like that quote. But the problem is, ashwagandha has a tendency to numb cortisol so much that not only does it help you sleep tremendously, it can knock you out, it can calm you down within hours after taking it, but it tends to have a lingering effect where people will start to feel a lack of ambition. They'll completely lose all desire, all pleasure. They'll get androhenia, where they have a complete lack of pleasure for anything, and they'll just feel like, some people even said that they felt what's the word, like almost like in a vegetative state or whatever, like a zombie, like they just feel incapacitated almost. And this effect doesn't just happen for 12 hours. It can last up to 48 hours or more. For me, it took about 3 days when I took when I used to take the whole root extract for the effects to mostly go away. And there's a couple reasons why that's the case with ashwagandha. And just keep in mind, this video is about like a lot of different so-called adaptogenic herbs that don't seem to work as a universal normalizing substance for everybody. That's what they claim adaptogens are, but they're really not. Not all the time, not with all things. But basically, ashwagandha seems to act mostly through as an agonist of GABA in some specific ways on certain receptors in certain forms. But you can think of it as a GABA agonizing herb, okay? And it has some sort of effects on NMDA and glycine receptors as well, okay? But the main thing you want to think of it as is trending in the direction of GABA agonizing, okay? That's a useful description of its mechanism without getting too deep in the weeds to where we lose its practical relevance to the discussion, okay? Being too accurate with mechanisms tends to lead us down rabbit holes that aren't very useful. So I just don't do that anymore. And really, we don't know exactly all of its mechanisms of action or what it's really doing per se, okay? But anyway, from the evidence that we do have, that seems to be the case. So anyway, there's other problematic, and so it kind of works like a benzo almost. And a lot of people say when they take ashwagandha, they tend to feel drug-like effects, which is probably why it's so popularly used and people love it so much, especially in modern times, because everyone's used to these drug-like effects. People are taking all this caffeine and these other super powerful type drugs or stimulants, and then when they take ashwagandha, it's got an even more potent drug-like effect. So people love that because they can actually feel it. But so there's other problems with it though, and so you can get withdrawals potentially. But the biggest one is the andohenia and lack of desire, lack of pleasure, lack of purpose, okay? And this effect doesn't happen right away. Usually, if you take enough of it, it can. If you take too much at once. But even in smaller doses, we're talking 1/8 of a teaspoon of a whole root extract, or super low dose, like 250 milligrams of KSM 66. After about 2 weeks, the effects seem to build up over time. There's some people that claim it has to do with the downregulation of of some of the serotonin receptors, but similar to certain antidepressants. But anyway, it's not entirely good in that regard. So there's another commonly associated effect of ashwagandha that doesn't really sound like a normalizing herb, and that's its potential to induce a pseudo hyperthyroid state. So first of all, there is evidence that ashwagandha can increase the conversion of T3 into T4, and can basically upregulate the production of thyroid hormones over time. And I've seen at least 12 anecdotal reports on various forums, like Launch City, which was like a forum back in the day where people, biohackers and longevity gurus and drug experimenters would get together and they'd experiment for a long time and they'd post their lab data and their results and all this other stuff. And they basically experiment together and share their findings. And I saw pretty commonly reports of ashwagandha increasing T3 and T4, actually both, and creating a pseudo hyperthyroid state. And and then I've seen this in Reddit forums too. And I've seen a couple of YouTube videos about it. And legitimately speaking, it's not just that the thyroid hormones were increased, but the whole reason why they even checked to see in the first place is because these people didn't even have a thyroid condition. Okay, they were normal, healthy people. They started taking ashwagandha, and some of them reported at first it was amazing, helped with sleep and everything, but then started to have the opposite effect, where They were already healthy. They took ashwagandha. It made them even healthier, made them sleep better and all this stuff. And then it started to have the reverse effect where they started to feel extremely anxious over time. Okay? And they started to have night sweats. They were always hot. They had racing thoughts, and the list goes on. Come to find out, they had abnormally high levels of thyroid hormone. And when they stopped taking ashwagandha, the thyroid hormones went back down to baseline after a period of like a month or so, or like 12 days to a month, depending on who you're looking at, like whose report. But anyway, so that's ashwagandha. Okay, it's pretty clearly not a normalizing herb. Okay, and maybe maybe it's because you need to take a very tiny amount. Who knows, right? Another example would be something like rhodiola. So rhodiola entirely depends on the type of extract, if it's a whole herb or not, and then also the species. Okay, a lot of people, they only look at Rhodiola rosea as what we refer to as rhodiola. But a lot of people don't realize Rhodiola crenulata was one of the first forms of rhodiola, one of the first strains that were originally termed as an adaptogen. I don't even think Rhodiola rosea was termed an adaptogen by the Soviets when they were kind of doing the initial research. But it doesn't really matter. Either way, Rhodiola crenulata has different active compounds, different percentages of it, and it's completely different in its effects compared to Rhodiola rosea. And so already, you can't really say rhodiola in general is an adaptogen because the different strains have completely different properties and different effects. For some people, rhodiola can put them to sleep. And we'll just talk for the sake of this discussion. The most commonly taken form of rhodiola is Rhodiola rosea, usually the 3% rosavin extract with 1% salidroside. It tends to help people focus, tends to cause beneficial effects in energy and all this stuff. Most people, I'd say at least 65%, maybe even more, maybe 80% of anecdotal reports of rhodiola tends to be that it's beneficial. And by the way, the research on these things mostly show positive benefits, just so everyone knows. There is some studies, though, that shows rhodiola can actually increase tiredness and fatigue, by the way. But anyway, so most people will find that Rhodiola rosea works for them. But there is like a 20 to 40% of people that, there's quite a few people that I've seen that said rhodiola either gives them this really weird, uncomfortable feeling of tiredness, or it makes them feel lethargic, or it makes them feel depressed, or it makes them feel extremely anxious, or it gives them anxiety. I've seen someone say it makes them more angry and these other things. And I've seen a pretty common report that rhodiola can reduce libido. And I found that seems to be the case personally as well. So anyway, what I'm saying here is that rhodiola does not seem to have these normalizing effects for everybody all the time that's commonly touted. And the other thing is, the longer that people take rhodiola or ashwagandha, usually from what I've seen, the greater the side effects tend to kick in. So that's another kind of contradiction. Adaptogenic herbs are supposed to improve their effects over time, kind of like Chinese tonics. But it seems like the longer you take rhodiola, the more it kind of trends towards making you feel tired, if anything, or lethargic. And the longer you take ashwagandha, usually the greater the potential for your thyroid hormones to be borderline hyperthyroid, or the greater the effects build up to where you just feel that anhedonia effect, right? And for me, I actually noticed extreme muscle pains with ashwagandha, but it's claimed to reduce muscle pain. I will admit the one thing I did notice with ashwagandha, though, is that I had extremely pronounced strength gains, which is weird. And I think my jiu-jitsu performance dramatically improved. But I was just tired all the time, lost ambition, and always sore. Extreme muscle pain, so it didn't get better otherwise. But anyway, one more herb we'll talk about is Panax red ginseng. So Panax Red Ginseng, is another one that's commonly referred to as an adaptogen. I think it's like the very first adaptogenic herb, so to speak, that's listed in the book Adaptogens by that David Winston guy. And everyone seems to think ginseng is just this universally normalizing herb that anyone can take, and it just has a beneficial effect. And it's funny how a lot of these people in a lot of these books, they claim that it doesn't have any negative side effects. But then it'll tell you, oh, it can be excessively stimulating. It's like, well, I guess it's not a side effect. I guess it is a direct effect, but still, it's not a beneficial effect for everyone nonetheless. For me, I love Panax Red Ginseng, and I've actually found, its effects are a little, can seem a little weird if you take too much too soon. But I found overall it definitely reduces my muscle pains, helps me recover from training and exercise, makes me in an overall great mood. Seems to be dopaminergic in a way. And it seems to help me sleep as well. It seems to increase my energy when I'm sleep deprived, improve my sleep when I am able to sleep. Helps me function despite the stress and helps to relieve the stress at the same time. So I'd say for me, ashwagandha, as long as I dose it right, tends to be good. However, a lot of people find, did I say ashwagandha? I meant Panax Ginseng, my bad. But a lot of people find Panax Ginseng is overstimulating. It makes their thoughts race. It causes them to sweat a lot, makes them hotter, and it can cause insomnia. And, it depends on the type you're taking, and I would recommend you try a 6-year-old root of just the dry root powder and try to brew it how it's supposed to be brewed, about a half teaspoon to a teaspoon. Brew it for simmer it for like an hour maybe, and then take that along with the actual powder as well. But take it in the morning, of course. But a lot of people say it's overstimulating and this and that. I'll tell you, Panax Red Ginseng seems to increase appetite, and it seems to be kind of like best used for people who are not necessarily prone to anxiety per se. But then again, I think after a while of taking it, I have noticed anti-anxiety effects. So all I'm going to say is that traditionally, though, in Chinese medicine texts, it was recommended to only be used by old people or people who are extremely sick or in a nutrient-deprived state, because it can be too stimulating for young, energetic people and people that already have anxiety. And usually they'd recommend to take the more yin ginseng, which would be like American ginseng or another one. So, like pseudo Panax ginseng, or Panax nata pseudo ginseng, whatever it's called, or gynosema, or maybe Eleuthero. But anyway, all I'm trying to get across in this video is that just like anything, we need to be skeptical and understand that nothing is absolute, nothing is exactly how we assume it to be or say that it is. And you have to be careful with these experts who are just super confident and sure of what they're saying. A lot of times more confident and sure someone is of something in an absolute sense, the less accurate it actually is in the scientific literature and also in practical usage. So in regards to this idea of adaptogens, I think the concept holds some usefulness as long as you take it with a grain of salt. I do not think that adaptogens are normalizing. I don't think that all herbs that we call adaptogens have like a double direction effect where, it can, if you're overstimulated, it can relax you, or if you're too relaxed or understimulated, it can stimulate you. I don't think that's how it works. I think herbs have very specific mechanisms that they act on, and it doesn't change based on your biology. They have the same compounds that work the same way in most humans, unless you have genetic polymorphisms, such as, the MTHFR gene that changes the absorption and conversion of things like folate and methylcobalamin or whatever, B12. And various other things like your conversion of beta-carotene and vitamin A. More simple, well-known genetic changes, but not something like, if one person takes ginseng, it can increase adrenaline and make them have a lot of energy because they're understimulated. Whereas if another person takes ginseng, it increases GABA and hinders the creation of adrenaline or something, and it works completely differently. Like, I just don't think that exactly is a thing. I'll tell you what I do think, though. I think these herbs, and actually I think this is actually what the common scientific mechanism is assumed to be, is that there are certain like neuropeptides that these herbs can work on, and that neuropeptide being modulated changes the way your body reacts to stress in a way that's normalizing. So that makes more sense. But the other one is, the suppression of cortisol, or just a so-called modulation of cortisol. I don't think that is real modulation, where it's like it just changes something up and down depending on what you need at that moment. Like, especially in regards to ashwagandha. Ashwagandha looks like it just completely turns off cortisol, and it seems to upregulate thyroid hormone whether you need it or not. So the idea that ashwagandha is a adaptogen, I think, is completely false. Rhodiola, I could kind of see. It has some pretty solid evidence backing its so-called modulation through neuroepinephrine and kind of like the breakdown of neurotransmitters that I could see as being adaptogenic and normalizing in a way. Panax ginseng, it seems to have molecules that both stimulate the immune system and the nervous system, but also calm it. Although I don't think that, it changes depending on the person. I think the traditional Chinese way of using ginseng is a healthier way to go, where if you need more calming, more yin, take American ginseng. If you need more like yang and more stimulation, take Panax red ginseng. I think that's a better kind of way to go. Asian ginseng versus American ginseng. Choose the herb that you want, that you're going to take depending on what you need. Don't take one herb and expect it to change and adapt to you. So, yeah, I think adaptogenic herbs as a concept, really what they are like, cortisol or fatigue modifying. Like, you think of them as just like stress modulating tonics is probably a better way to put them. But not adaptogens, not normalizing herbs that adapt to your needs. That isn't a good way to put it. So yeah, hopefully this made sense. And they call like cordyceps an adaptogenic herb in that book, and I just think that's interesting because I've taken cordyceps on a daily basis and adaptogenic amounts. I've taken small doses of cordyceps for months. I've taken large doses of cordyceps for months. And I'm taking the highest quality stuff possible. And I found just the same result every time, that it seems to boost my energy, boost my anaerobic and aerobic capacity. I've noticed that it boosts my mood, but I also noticed there seems to be a tolerance effect after a while, and it might hinder my sleep. I've never noticed it to have a normalizing effect on my body. It seems to have very specific effects that don't change or don't normalize with my needs. So, yeah. That's why I prefer to refer to these things as like tonic herbs, not adaptogenic herbs. But it's still important for you to kind of read the research on them and read the books written on them. So, anyway, leave your question and comments down below, and I'll talk to y'all next time.